I had $60 million sitting quietly in my account, but I never told a soul. To my kids, I looked like some washed-up beggar, while they showered praise and affection on Robert, the man who used to be my rival and ended up as their stepfather. They laughed at my simple way of living, never realizing I had more strength than they could imagine. And then, at their bankruptcy hearing, I let the mask drop. I told the truth about whose name was actually on the deeds to their homes. The shock on their faces was priceless, and from that moment on, the fallout was unavoidable. God, what a piece of junk. Laura curled her lip as she slid out of her shiny sedan, her eyes landing on my old 1998 Chevrolet Malibu like it was roadkill stinking on the highway. The fading evening sun hit the fresh scratches running along the passenger side, scars from the used car lot where I'd picked it up just that morning. Daniel climbed out from the driver's side, shaking his head with a smirk. Seriously, Dad? You look like a beggar. Our stepdad just picked up a brand new Lexus, silver trim, leather seats, the whole package, and here you are celebrating this heap? I forced a smile, drying my hands on the kitchen towel I'd been holding. Come on in, kids. Dinner's ready. I made your favorite, meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Meatloaf. Laura's voice dripped with scorn. Dad, when's the last time you had a real meal? Robert took us to that steakhouse downtown last week. $100 steaks, imported wine. They followed me into the small kitchen where I'd set the table with the nicest dishes I owned, the ones their mother had left behind after the divorce. The overhead light cast hard shadows across the worn linoleum, making the place look smaller and shabbier than it really was. Sit down, please, I said, gesturing to the chairs. I thought we could celebrate together. Daniel plopped into his seat like he was doing me a favor. Celebrate what, exactly? That rust bucket out front. Dad, it's embarrassing. My friends see me climbing out of that thing. Your friends don't matter, I said, setting meatloaf on his plate. What matters is having reliable transportation. Laura let out a sharp laugh. Reliable? Dad? It looks like it's being held together with duct tape and prayer. Robert's getting me a new Mercedes for my birthday. A Mercedes, not some junkyard special. The fork trembled slightly in my hand before I set it down. I watched them pick at their food with about as much enthusiasm as prisoners on death row. You know, Daniel said between bites. It's tough explaining to people why our dad lives like this when your stepdad isn't your father. I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. No, but he acts like one, Laura shot back. He provides for us. He cares about how we look, about our future. Look around this dump, Dad. When's the last time you bought new furniture or fixed that leaky faucet? I glanced around the kitchen, the sagging cabinets, the mismatched chairs, the old refrigerator humming in the corner. Everything worked, everything was clean, but I couldn't deny it was worn down. After the divorce, I'd moved into this modest rental while they stayed in the family home with their mother and Robert. I live within my means, I said carefully. There's value in that. Value? Daniel nearly choked on his potatoes. Dad, you're working at a hardware store, driving a car older than me. What kind of example is that? The words hit harder than they probably meant. I'd spent 30 years at that hardware store, clawing my way from stock boy to assistant manager. I'd paid for their college, never missed a birthday, a graduation, not one milestone. When their mother left me for Robert, the flashy contractor with deep pockets, they chose sides without a second thought. I've always provided for you, I said quietly. College tuition, car payments. That summer in Europe for Laura. That was ages ago, Dad. Laura waved her hand like she was brushing me off. Robert's been the one taking care of us since Mom married him. He bought Daniel his apartment, paid for my wedding. The wedding you didn't even invite me to, I muttered. Because you would have shown up in some thrift store suit, Dad, she snapped. Probably driving that monster out there. We couldn't let you embarrass us. Daniel pointed toward the window where my Malibu sat in the driveway. Something inside me cracked. The patience I'd carried for years, through their cold shoulders, their snide remarks, their constant dismissal of everything I'd done. It split wide open like ice thawing in the spring. I pushed my chair back hard, the legs scraping across the floor. Get out. They froze, forks halfway to their mouths. I said get out. Now. Dad, Laura started, her tone half apologetic, half shocked. Don't. My voice carried a weight that surprised even me. Take your opinions about my car, my house, my life, and get out. Daniel shoved his chair back, his face flushed with anger. Fine, but don't come running to us when you need help. I won't, I said, following them to the door. Trust me on that. They gathered their things in a stunned silence. At the threshold, Laura turned, her expression a strange mix of pride and hurt. You're making a mistake, Dad. We're the only family you've got left. I stood at the window, watching as their expensive car purred to life. The taillights glowed red, then disappeared around the corner, leaving nothing but silence and the weight of 30 years of resentment pressing down on me. Beggar, I whispered to the empty room. They call me a beggar. Moving mechanically, I cleared the plates they'd barely touched. The meatloaf sat cold and untouched, hours of work wasted on kids who saw me as nothing more than a shame to cover up. After they vanished into the night, I locked the door and collapsed into my chair. The house felt different now, like a bridge had been burned and I was standing on the ashes. I pulled out my laptop and typed in the old passwords, my fingers moving from memory. The screen took its time loading, then revealed the numbers I'd carried in silence for decades. $60 million. Built piece by piece, stock by stock, investment by investment. Over 40 years of discipline. It had all started with my first paycheck from the copper mines at 22. While the other guys spent their money on booze and weekend thrills, I bought 5 shares of IBM, then 10 shares of Coca-Cola. And I kept going, reinvesting every dividend, adding every extra dollar I could spare. I remembered those early years like they were yesterday. Long shifts at the copper mine, stumbling home caked in dust and sweat, too tired to eat, yet still staying up half the night with company reports spread out under a dim lamp. My first wife used to say I was obsessed, maybe even foolish, but I knew better. I knew I was laying the foundation for something that mattered, something that would outlast the backbreaking labor I was doing. When the mining industry went belly up, I wasn't caught flat-footed like the rest of the guys in town. I'd already started branching out. While my neighbors lost their paychecks and their homes, I quietly shifted to working at the hardware store and kept building my portfolio. Apple at $12 a share, Microsoft at 8, Amazon at 18. Back then, those companies looked like gambles, but to me they felt like inevitabilities waiting to happen. That secret had been both my burden and my test. I wanted to know who truly loved me, not for what I had, but for who I was. Francesca, their mother, failed that test with flying colors. She walked away for Robert's shiny suits and new money. And now my kids had failed it too, sneering at me, calling me a beggar, all while their so-called wealthy stepfather couldn't dream of touching the fortune I'd built. For years I'd planned to leave everything to them, every share, every dividend, every dollar carefully stacked like bricks. But sitting at that kitchen table, their voices still dripping with disgust in my ears, I felt something shift inside. They didn't deserve an inheritance. They needed a lesson. I opened another browser tab and started digging into property records. Didn't take long to find exactly what I was after: Daniel's apartment, where he shelled out $1,500 a month, and Laura's duplex, $1,200 monthly with her husband. Both properties were owned by Mountain View Holdings, some small real estate company barely limping along since the pandemic. For the first time that night, I smiled. Jonero, I'd make a call. Mountain View Holdings was about to get an offer they couldn't turn down. You want to see a beggar? I muttered to the empty kitchen. I'll show you what poverty really looks like. I shut the laptop and went to bed, my mind running 100 miles an hour. They'd humiliated me for the last time. Now it was my turn to hand out consequences. Lying in the dark, I thought back over every sacrifice, every late night, every careful move that had built my fortune, all of it hidden even from the family that had written me off as worthless. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd compared me endlessly to Robert's success, I'd been slowly stacking wealth that dwarfed his business a dozen times over. Jonero was going to open doors. Tonight, I drifted off to sleep, planning my children's first real lesson in humility. Morning light filtered through the curtains, waking me from a restless night full of echoes: beggar, embarrassment, rust bucket. Their words replayed like a broken record, fueling the anger that had hardened into pure determination. I shuffled to the kitchen, fired up my old desktop, and listened as the fan groaned to life. While it loaded, I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd been using for 20 years. Dust danced in the sunlight pouring through the window, but I hardly noticed. My eyes were fixed on the screen. My brokerage account opened after the usual security hoops. I scrolled through decades of choices that looked small back then, but had grown into giants. Microsoft, bought at 12, now trading north of 400. Apple, picked up at 15, sitting around 180. I highlighted a few positions, enough to fund the next step. The prompt came up. Are you sure you want to sell 51,000 shares of Microsoft Corporation? I clicked confirm without the slightest hesitation. As the screen spun, processing the sale, I sipped my coffee and thought back to the divorce. Francesca had been so sure she was right, so certain Robert's construction business spelled security, while I was just a dreamer wasting time on pocket change. She'd mocked me for keeping my little stock portfolio separate from our joint accounts. You and your stocks, she'd said during one of our last arguments. When are you going to grow up and put your money into something real? Something real? I chuckled now, watching the confirmation land. The sale cleared, and just like that, $30 million in cash sat in my account, more than Robert could ever earn in 10 lifetimes. The doorbell rang sharply, jolting me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, 8:20 in the morning. Who the hell was stopping by this early? When I opened the door, there she was. Francesca, face red with anger, expensive handbag clutched in both hands like a shield. How could you treat your own children like that? She snapped, barging past me into the house. Daniel called me last night in tears. Tears, George. You threw them out. Your own flesh and blood. I shut the door calmly behind her. They're grown, Francesca. 30 and 27. Adults. It's past time they learned respect. Respect. She spun on me, her voice climbing. You humiliated them. They were trying to help you see reason about that ridiculous car. Help me see reason? I almost smiled. By calling me a beggar? By comparing me to your husband? By treating me like I'm nothing but a failure? You are a failure, she screamed. Look at this place. Look at your life. You're 62 years old, renting a dump, driving a car that belongs in a junkyard. Our children are ashamed of you. Actions have consequences, I said evenly. They chose cruelty. I chose not to tolerate it. She froze for a second, maybe surprised by how calm I was. You've changed, she whispered. You used to be reasonable, kind. Now you're just cold. I'm not cold, Francesca, I told her. I'm done being your doormat. Don't you dare blame this on me, she snapped, her face tightening. I tried to make our marriage work. But you? You were always buried in those stupid financial magazines, rattling on about companies nobody had ever heard of. Robert understands how to take care of a family. Robert, I said softly. The same Robert you were sleeping with while I was working double shifts to pay for Daniel's college. Her face drained of color. That was a long time ago. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, you're all still living in the same fantasy, that I'm the villain and you're the victims. She stood there, speechless for once, her anger sagging into something closer to doubt. Then she straightened her shoulders, snatched up her purse, and marched to the door. This isn't over, George, she said sharply. You've hurt your children for the last time. I stood there watching her slide into that Lexus, paid for with Robert's money, no doubt, and head off down the winding hillside road. When her tail lights vanished around the bend, the ridiculousness of the whole situation hit me square in the chest. My grown kids, 30 and 27 years old, had gone running to their mother like spoiled kids denied dessert. I shut the door behind me and went back to my computer. The money from the stock sale would hit my account in 3 business days. Soon enough, I'd finally show them all what real power looked like. Those days passed in a haze of routine, each morning starting with me checking my inbox, waiting for that one alert. And then it came, wire transfer complete. $60 million available in your checking account. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, realizing that 4 decades of patience and careful planning had all been distilled into those few words. The fortune that would change everything now sat quietly in my account, just waiting for me to use it. I grabbed my car keys and drove downtown to a small real estate office tucked between a coffee shop and a pawn shop. Behind the desk sat a young woman with bright red hair, her eyes lifting from her computer as I walked in. I'm looking to buy an apartment building, I told her. The one on Boorley Street, units 108. She blinked. That's a significant purchase. Are you already working with an agent? I'll work with whoever can close the deal the fastest. 20 minutes later, I found myself across from Susan Miller, a realtor in her 50s with tired eyes and a stack of files. She pushed a folder across the desk and explained, Mountain View Holdings has been struggling since the pandemic. They're motivated to sell, but the asking price is $3. $5 million. I'll take it at that price, I said without hesitation. Her eyebrows shot up. Don't you want to review the inspection reports, rental history, maintenance records? I know the property, I replied, pulling out my checkbook. What I want to know is how fast we can close. The next 2 hours disappeared in a blur of contracts and phone calls. I signed each page with a steady hand, though my mind wandered now and then to the times I'd floated Daniel a few $1,000s to cover rent between jobs. $3,000 here, $2,000 there. He always swore he'd pay me back. He never did. By the time the deal wrapped, Susan looked almost dazed. I've never seen a cash transaction move this quickly, she murmured as I signed the last page. I don't believe in wasting time, I told her flatly. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse to record the deed. The clerk, an elderly man with thick glasses, stamped the paperwork with practiced efficiency. Congratulations, Mr. Simmons, he said. You're now the official owner of 847 Bewerley Street. From there, I went straight across town to another realtor's office. Laura's duplex was listed with a different company, but the process unfolded almost exactly the same. The seller, a widow named Mrs. Tanaka, was eager to unload the place. It's been nothing but headaches, she admitted over the phone. The tenants are fine, but the upkeep is draining me. I bought it outright for $680,000 in cash. By 5 o'clock that evening, I owned both of my children's homes. Driving back through the twisting mountain roads toward my modest rental, I thought about what I had just done. These buildings weren't just properties. They were leverage, tools I could wield to turn years of quiet saving into a shield against their scorn. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the mountainside, and for the first time in years, I felt something new: total control. At home, I spread the fresh deeds across my kitchen table like a general laying out maps before battle. Daniel's apartment, secured. Laura's duplex, secured. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. I picked up my phone and pulled up the property management company's number. Johnero, they'd be told rents were going up. That was the reality of new ownership. My finger hovered over the call button as I thought about how those conversations would play out. Soon my children would learn that their beggar father was now their landlord. With the ink on the deeds still drying, I wasted no time. I opened my anonymous email account and started setting the wheels in motion. Yesterday's anger had hardened into today's strategy. I typed out my first message to Susan Miller, steady and deliberate. As the new owner of 847 Bewerley Street, I'm implementing immediate rent increases. Unit 4's rent will rise from $1,500 to $4,800 monthly, effective next month. Please notify the tenant immediately. I paused, thinking back to Daniel's 25th birthday, when I'd quietly wiped out his $3,000 credit card bill, money he'd blown on clothes and fancy dinners. He thanked me with a distracted nod, already planning his next spree. The second email was just as short. For the duplex property, Unit B's rent will increase from $1,200 to $4,100 monthly, effective next month. Handle this discreetly. I hit send on both messages, then leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Within 2 hours, the phone rang. Susan Miller's voice carried a nervous edge I hadn't heard before. Mr. Simmons, I delivered the notices like you asked, but the reactions were intense. Go on, I said, setting my coffee cup down. The young man in Unit 4, Daniel, he lost his temper completely. He shouted about robbery, slammed the door so hard I thought it might break. He's threatening to move out immediately. I made a vague sound, hiding my satisfaction. And the young woman in the duplex, Susan continued. She broke down crying, kept asking, how can we possibly afford this? She begged me to contact the owner, said she'd do anything to negotiate. Anything. I thought back to Laura's wedding shower, when I'd quietly tucked $5,000 into an envelope for her honeymoon. She barely glanced at it, stuffing it into her purse while she showed off fancy gifts from Robert's rich friends. These are fair market adjustments, I told Susan. If they can't afford the new rent, they're free to look elsewhere. But Mr. Simmons, she said, almost pleading, tripling the rent overnight will cause serious hardship. They seemed genuinely desperate. They're adults, I said coldly. They'll figure it out. After hanging up, I walked to my kitchen window and looked out over the Montana mountains. One evening, I overheard a neighbor talking while walking his dog. He was chatting with another resident about the new landlord, who was apparently driving good tenants out of town. If only they realized that this so-called ruthless landlord was the quiet man they'd seen for years, tinkering in his yard and minding his own business. Back inside, I opened my laptop and spent an hour digging through Montana tenant laws, making sure I hadn't stepped out of bounds. The rent hikes were steep, no question about that, but perfectly legal as long as proper notice was given. Daniel and Laura had 30 days to figure out their next moves. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a small notebook, sketching out every possible reaction they might have. They could run to their mother and Robert for help. They might try negotiating with the mystery owner. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd come crawling back to me. The father they'd mocked for years, finally showing a little respect. The thought made me grin. It was ironic, really. They'd spent half their lives comparing me unfavorably to Robert, praising his business sense and financial success. Yet here they were about to feel the crushing weight of financial reality, courtesy of investments I'd made long before their beloved stepfather ever stepped into the picture. The phone rang again. It was Susan Miller, and she sounded even more frazzled than before. "Mr. Simmons, I hate to bother you so late, but there's been a development. Your son, Daniel, showed up at the office with some lawyer friend. They're trying to fight the rent increase, saying it's retaliatory." Retaliatory against what? I asked flatly. That's exactly what I said. They couldn't give me a straight answer. The lawyer caught on pretty quickly that their case was flimsy and left not long after. Susan went on, describing the chaos, Daniel's red-faced shouting, Laura's desperate phone calls, the lawyer's awkward retreat once he realized the rent hikes were technically airtight. "They're both convinced someone has it out for them," she added. "Your daughter keeps asking who bought the properties, but I told her that information is confidential." "Keep it that way," I instructed. No sooner had I hung up than my phone buzzed again, this time flashing Laura's name across the screen. A preview of her text popped up. "Dad, please call me. We need to talk. It's really important." I let the phone vibrate on the table, savoring the irony. For years, my calls had gone unanswered. Now, their desperation was so strong it nearly leapt off the screen. I waited, enjoying the silence, before even considering how I'd respond. About an hour later, headlights swept across my driveway. It wasn't the polished sedan they usually flaunted, but an older Honda, clearly Robert's hand-me-down or maybe a loaner from Laura's husband. Their frantic knocks rattled the door, sharp and impatient. When I opened it, they stood on the porch looking like they'd been dragged through a storm. Laura's eyes were red and smeared with makeup. Daniel's jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitching in his face. "Dad," Laura said, her voice trembling, "we're in real trouble. Our rent tripled overnight, and we don't know what to do." "Please," Daniel added, his words sounding like they were ripped straight from his throat. "We just need some help, just a loan, until we figure this out." I let them in, though reluctantly, and they perched uneasily on my old couch, the same one they'd mocked just days earlier. Now it looked more like a judge's bench than a piece of furniture. "You're here for money?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Dad, please," Laura begged, her tears starting to spill. "We're desperate. The new landlord won't negotiate, won't even tell us who he is. We could lose everything." I shook my head. "You've called me a beggar before. Handle it yourselves." Daniel's mask cracked, his voice dripping venom. "I was right then. You are a beggar." "Fine," he continued. "We'll just go to Mom and Robert. They'll help us. They actually care about family." "Yes," Laura jumped in, wiping her eyes. "Robert would never let us suffer like this. He knows what it means to take care of people you love." I walked to the window and looked out at the beat-up Honda in my driveway, sitting there like a symbol of their downfall. The irony was almost too rich. They were planning to run to Robert for salvation, blind to the fact that the trap was already locked. "So go ask Robert," I said simply. "Ask him for $3,600 a month for Laura's place, and $4,500 for Daniel's. See how long his generosity lasts." "That's not the point," Daniel exploded, leaping to his feet. "You're our father. You should want to help us." "Help you with what?" I shot back. "Living beyond your means? Spending money you don't have on things you don't need?" "We don't spend money we don't have," Laura protested, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Really? I turned and fixed them both with a look. Daniel, how much did you blow on restaurants last month? And Laura, how much did that purse cost, the one you flaunted at dinner last week? They glanced at each other, and I saw the answer in their eyes. They'd been living like they were wealthy, while in reality scraping by on working-class incomes padded with Robert's occasional generosity. That's different, Daniel muttered. Is it? I said sharply. You mock my modest life, call me an embarrassment, then come running here the second your fantasy lifestyle collides with reality. As I spoke, my eyes landed on the little wooden box sitting on my mantel. A school project Laura had made in elementary school. Painted with bright flowers, it carried the words, "Best Dad Ever." The sweet little girl who'd crafted that gift was now the desperate woman on my couch, too proud to admit her mistakes, but not too proud to beg. We're sorry about the other night, Laura whispered. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. My feelings? I nearly laughed. You think this is about feelings? Then what is it about? Daniel shot back. Respect, I said quietly. Something you've never given me. Silence settled over the room, heavy and suffocating, as years of careless insults and quiet cruelty finally caught up to them. At last, Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his face burning with anger and bruised pride. Fine, we'll handle it ourselves, he snapped. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you're old and need help. I won't, I replied evenly. Daniel stormed toward the door, tossing one last barb over his shoulder, a reminder of every slight I'd quietly endured over the years. But I wasn't swallowing them anymore. Not now. Not ever. Laura lingered at the threshold, her expression softer, tinged with something that looked almost like regret. This isn't over, Dad, she whispered before following her brother out. I stood there watching their car disappear down the street, already imagining their next move. They'd run straight to Francesca and Robert, hands out, begging for salvation. Soon they'd learn that Robert's generosity had limits and Francesca's influence wasn't nearly as wide as they believed. As their taillights melted into the dusk, the house fell into a heavy silence, broken only by my steady breathing. I locked the door with deliberate care and eased into my armchair, the sting of their parting words still humming in the air like static before a storm. I didn't have to wait long to see how they'd play it. Within days, rumors spread through Bates' tight-knit community like poison seeping into a well. Mrs. Wanderson from next door brought it up first while tending her garden. Her tone was careful, but her words landed sharp. Such a shame about your family troubles, George. I'd hope you can work things out. At the coffee shop on Main Street, I overheard Laura holding court at a corner booth with her friend Jessica. Her voice cracked on cue as she dabbed her eyes with tissues. He just abandoned us, she said, her voice breaking with perfect precision. After everything we've done to help him see reason about his finances. Her lies were almost elegant in their simplicity. She cast me as the cold-hearted father who'd turned his back on his children, while she and Daniel played the part of heartbroken victims. Nowhere in her story was there mention of the mockery, the dismissiveness, the endless comparisons to Robert. Daniel, meanwhile, went for the blunt approach. Anonymous notes started showing up in my mailbox. Nothing the police would take seriously, but pointed enough. This won't end well for you, read one. Family is everything, said another. The phone calls came next, unknown numbers, silence when I answered. And then Daniel's voice, altered but unmistakable. You made a mistake, old man. We won't forget this. I listened without reaction and hung up. Let him shout into the void. Then came the envelope. Thick, official, delivered by registered mail on a Tuesday morning. The letterhead read Wilson and Associates. I slid it open carefully, my coffee cooling untouched beside me. Notice of intent to sue for emotional distress and abandonment of parental duties. At the bottom were 3 signatures, Francesca's sweeping flourish, Laura's careful script, and Daniel's jagged scrawl. They were accusing me of causing them severe trauma through my sudden withdrawal of financial support. They demanded compensation for their suffering and an immediate resumption of payments. As I read their words, old memories surfaced like ghosts. Daniel at 13 asking if he could change his last name to Roberts. Laura at 15 refusing to visit because my apartment was too depressing. Their loyalties had cracked back then, and here they were again, sharpening those cracks into weapons. I reached for my phone and dialed the one lawyer I trusted, David Miller, Susan's brother. He had handled my property deals with quiet efficiency. "George," he said, his voice steady, "what can I do for you? I need advice on a frivolous lawsuit. My ex-wife and kids are claiming emotional distress." David chuckled dryly. "Let me guess, they want money. They want me to start supporting them again. I never legally owed them in the first place. Bring me the papers." Sounds like harassment. Later, I tried to clear my head with a drive into town. At the grocery store, I was loading bags into my Chevy when John Davis walked over, looking uneasy. "Hey, George," he said. "I hate to mention this, but people are talking about you and your kids." "What are they saying, John?" "That you threw them out of their homes, that you're being vindictive because they're successful and you're, well, a failure." I finished for him. John shifted, his face reddening. "I'm just telling you what's being said. Maybe you should talk to them. Work something out." I closed my trunk slowly, my voice calm but firm. "Sometimes, John, the truth isn't what people want to hear." That evening, David called again, his voice carrying a new weight. "I've been digging into your son, Daniel. Turns out he's got some vulnerabilities in his work history that might be useful to you." "What kind of vulnerabilities?" I asked. "The kind that make lawsuits disappear fast. I'll send you the details, but you might want to bring in a private investigator." He gave me a name and number. Detective Leo Rodriguez, retired from the local police, now taking private cases. I turned the card over in my hand, the sharp corners pressing into my skin. My children had dragged this fight into the courts and poisoned the community against me. Maybe it was time to meet escalation with escalation. I didn't hesitate. As twilight deepened outside my window, I dialed the number. Then I brewed a cup of tea, steadying my hands as my resolve hardened into something colder. "Rodriguez Investigations," came a gravelly voice. "Mr. Rodriguez? David Miller gave me your name. I need someone looked into discreetly." "I can meet you tomorrow evening," he replied. "Beartooth Park, Old Pavilion, 7 o'clock. The next night, I drove to the outskirts under cover of fog. Leo Rodriguez was exactly the type of man I expected: weathered face, watchful eyes, the look of someone who'd spent decades reading human weakness. He settled onto the bench beside me. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "My son, Daniel," I said. "He works at Mountain States Insurance. I think he's been cutting corners, maybe padding expenses, maybe falsifying reports. Knowing his character, he'd take shortcuts if he thought he could get away with it." Rodriguez nodded once and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "How deep do you want me to go?" "Deep enough to uncover the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." 2 weeks later, a plain manila envelope arrived with the detective's report. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, going through every document with deliberate care. Daniel's employment file painted a picture of a man steadily sliding into dishonesty. Fabricated mileage claims, inflated receipts for client dinners, even a few instances of logging overtime for hours he never worked. The evidence was undeniable. As I sifted through the detective's dossier, I saw the patterns of Daniel's lifelong shortcuts mirrored in his professional life. Skipping chores as a kid, bending rules as an adult. One receipt caught my eye: a supposed client dinner at a restaurant that had been closed for renovations. It reminded me of 16-year-old Daniel telling me he'd spent his allowance on school supplies, only for me to later find video game receipts tucked into his backpack. I paused for 30 seconds, thinking of the boy who once helped me wash my car for a few dollars. Then his voice came back to me over the phone. "This won't end well for you, old man." I typed the anonymous email carefully, attaching scanned copies of the evidence. "Your employee, Daniel Simmons, has been systematically defrauding your company. Documentation attached." A concerned citizen. The soft chime of the sent message echoed in my quiet kitchen. I also sealed extra copies in an envelope addressed to Mountain States Insurance's corporate headquarters, including a cover letter outlining the pattern of fraud. Gloves on my hands, a habit from years of careful investing where anonymity sometimes mattered. Within a week, the news had spread through Butts Gossip Network. Daniel had been terminated immediately. Officially, it was for violating company policy, but the whispers were juicier. "They caught him stealing, Mrs. Wanderson murmured over her fence. "Red-handed, with fake receipts." I listened with the same neutral expression I'd worn for 40 years at family gatherings. When she pressed for my opinion, I simply said, "Actions have consequences." The next day, a social media post from one of Laura's friends caught my attention. prayers for the Simmons family during this difficult time. Sometimes life just hits you from all sides. I noted the worry in Laura's voice through that tiny snippet. She had always been the more emotional of my children, quick to unravel under stress. Daniel losing his job would terrify her, would make her wonder if she might be next. The question was, what secrets was she hiding? I closed my laptop and stared out the window at Montana's darkening sky over the mountains. Phase 2 of my education program was complete. Phase 3 was coming soon. The memory of Laura's panicked posts lingered in my mind as I booted up my computer again, fingers hovering over the keys, ready to tip the scales further. If Daniel was the brute force of their partnership, Laura was the subtle manipulator. Her downfall would require a different strategy. I pulled up the second detective report I'd commissioned on her real estate dealings. Leo Rodriguez had documented a pattern of client deceptions that would make any ethical realtor wince. Inflated property valuations, hidden foundation cracks, water damage concealed with fresh paint and strategic staging. The evidence was damning. Altered inspection reports, forged property histories, testimonials from clients discovering problems months after closing. One elderly couple had purchased a home with a compromised roof Laura had assured was recently renovated. The repair costs wiped out their savings. I posted the findings to 3 anonymous review sites, each entry carefully worded to appear organic. A concerned citizen sharing documented evidence of fraud. The forums accepted them immediately. My IP masked through layers of encryption Rhea had helped me set up. Next, I compiled email addresses from Laura's client files and sent each one a direct message. You may want to investigate your realtor's practices. Documentation attached. The evidence spoke for itself. No commentary required. Within hours, reactions flooded in. But the local real estate community was small, and word traveled fast. My phone buzzed with emergency alerts as news outlets picked up the story. I slipped on a hat, drove across town incognito, and parked outside Laura's office to witness the chaos firsthand. Through the window, I saw her pacing, phone pressed to her ear. No, Mrs. Wilson, I can explain. Yes, I understand. The call ended abruptly, shoulders shaking. Another client stormed in, voice carrying through the glass. You've ruined my investment. That foundation you swore was solid is cracking down the middle. Her attempts at damage control only worsened things. Social media posts defending her practices came across as hollow. These are baseless accusations from anonymous sources. I've always acted with integrity. Comments exploded with rebuttals from verified clients, each telling their own horror story. I pictured Laura's face crumpling, echoing the expressions I'd witnessed during their endless taunts, a quiet justice finally taking shape. At the weekly town meeting, I sat in the back row as angry homeowners shared their experiences. The mayor called for an investigation into local real estate practices. Complaints had already reached the state licensing board. Within a week, Laura's office was empty. The ferret sign in the window told the story more effectively than any news article. That evening, I walked Butt's quiet streets, breathing in the crisp Montana air. The detective's work had been precise, devastating. Laura's reputation was ruined. Her career finished. Like Daniel, she had learned the truth I had always known. Actions have consequences. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a pile of mail waiting in the box. Bills, junk advertisements, and one envelope that made me pause. It bore the official seal of the Butte County Court. Inside was a bankruptcy filing notice, and the name on it made my eyes narrow. Charles George Simmons. I studied the notice carefully, calculating the timing. The hearing was set for next Friday. Both of my children would be there, desperate and cornered. The perfect stage for the next act of my education program. The formal script on the bankruptcy notice seemed to pull me forward into the inevitable courtroom showdown. I set aside Laura's updates and focused on this new development, seeing the shared thread of my children's financial collapse. Everything wove together with precision in my mind. I gathered my files and drove to the courthouse under gray, brooding skies, arriving early to take my place in the back row. The Butte County Courthouse smelled of old wood and decades of legal drama, its high ceilings echoing whispers from past proceedings. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table, his lawyer shuffling papers with the weary air of someone managing an unavoidable defeat. Daniel's fingers drummed nervously against the polished wood, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning. Laura had come to support him, her presence a testament to their continued alliance against the world. She kept glancing around the room anxiously, as if expecting fresh calamities to emerge from the shadows. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, reviewed the bankruptcy petition with practiced scrutiny. Mr. Simmons, you're claiming debts exceeding $175,000 with assets under $40,000. Yes, Your Honor, Daniel whispered, barely audible. And your primary creditor is listed as an unknown property owner for back rent. That was my moment. I rose from my seat, documents in hand, feeling the weight of decades lift with every step toward the front of the courtroom. Your Honor, I can clarify that matter. The room went silent. Daniel's head snapped toward me, eyes widening in recognition. I'm the landlord you've cursed, I announced, my voice cutting clearly through the hush. And my accounts hold $60 million. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This can't be, he stammered, half rising from his chair. I handed the court clerk my property deeds, bank statements, and eviction papers. I own both properties where my children live. Given their continued harassment and threats, I am initiating immediate eviction proceedings. The judge raised her eyebrows, scanning the documents. Mr. Simmons, these appear to be in order. The bankruptcy filing becomes irrelevant if you are the primary creditor. Dad, Laura's voice cracked, sharp as a whip. You can't do this to us. Handing over the proofs, I felt decades of patience crystallize into this irreversible moment. Each figure on the statements spoke of careful observation and quiet restraint, now delivering its final blow. The judge's gavel fell with sharp finality. Petition denied. Immediate eviction granted. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and rustling papers. Daniel sat frozen, staring at statements showing more money than he'd ever imagined his beggar father could possess. $60 million, he whispered. You had $60 million, I finished, and you spent years mocking me, humiliating me, calling me a failure. Yes, I did. I wanted to see who you really were. Laura's carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks as tears ran freely. We're your children, she cried. How could you do this to your own blood? I gave you every opportunity to show respect, I said calmly, to demonstrate the character that would have made you worthy heirs. Instead, you chose cruelty. The bailiff stepped forward with the official eviction notice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. As I walked toward the courthouse exit, I heard footsteps behind me. My children were following, their earlier confidence replaced with desperate pleading, but I kept walking, back straight, mind already savoring the quiet satisfaction of justice served. Their voices faded as I pushed through the heavy doors, stepping into the crisp Montana afternoon, where the mountain air had never felt sweeter. Their shadows stretched across the courthouse stone as they hurried after me, faces etched with fear and feigned remorse, exactly as I had anticipated. I straightened my coat against the wind, absorbing their whispered urgencies, the lingering tension of the courtroom still in my posture. Dad, wait. Laura called, heels clicking frantically on the pavement. Please, we need to talk. I paused at the courthouse steps, watching them approach like swimmers clutching a lifeline. Their arrogance had crumbled, replaced by raw panic as they finally grasped the magnitude of their mistakes. Daniel reached me first, face pale and drawn. Dad, we're so sorry. We didn't know. We never realized you had $60 million. I responded evenly. No, you didn't know, because you were too busy mocking me to notice. Without warning, they both dropped to their knees on the courthouse steps, their expensive clothes scraping the rough stone. Passers-by stared, but they no longer cared about appearances. Now we'll live, Laura sobbed, mascara streaming. We'll change. We promise. We'll be better children. Daniel's voice cracked. We were wrong about everything. The car, the house, the way we treated you. We're begging you, don't do this to us. Kneeling before me, they invoked memories of childhood with calculated desperation. Laura held up a small wooden heart I had carved for her in elementary school. Remember when you made this for me? She said, trembling. You said it would always keep us connected. We're still your children, Dad. We're still family. Watching them scramble for words that had once cut deep, I felt the chains of obligation dissolve. In their place was a freedom earned over years of patience and quiet endurance. The heart in Laura's hand reminded me of all the sacrifices they had brushed aside, all the love they had rejected in favor of their stepfather's flashier handouts. "It's too late for that," I said firmly, stepping back from their grasping hands. "You've shown me who you really are. Money doesn't change that." "But we'll pay rent," Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking. "We'll get jobs." He faltered. I turned away, their desperate voices fading like distant thunder as I walked toward my car. Driving through streets I knew like the back of my hand, their pleas echoed in my mind, sharp and hollow. By the time I pulled up to my house, the eviction process was already underway. My phone buzzed with updates from the property management company. "Both properties are being secured," Susan Miller reported briskly. "The tenants have 72 hours to remove their belongings." Over the next 3 days, I watched from a distance as my children's lives unraveled completely. Daniel's unemployment left him scrambling for any work he could find, but by now, his reputation preceded him. Laura's real estate license was suspended while investigations unfolded. Former clients were filing lawsuits for fraud and misrepresentation. Eviction officers arrived exactly on schedule. Through whispers and intermediaries, I heard about their frantic packing, neighbors gathering like spectators, the moving truck loaded with furniture they'd have to sell to cover temporary housing. Their luxury cars went first, repossessed when payments fell behind. Designer clothes, expensive electronics, the symbols of their former lives, were pawned or sold online. Daniel ended up in a weekly rate motel on the edge of town, pride shattered at last. Laura bounced from couch to couch, each stay shorter than the last as friends' patience ran out. One evening, while I read in my armchair, the phone rang. Francesca's voice was tight, trembling with barely contained fury. "You've destroyed them, George. Are you satisfied now?" "I didn't destroy them," I said calmly. "I just stopped enabling them to destroy themselves. They're your children. They stopped being mine the moment they chose contempt over love, the moment they decided Robert was worth more than the man who actually raised them." She hung up without another word. The next morning, the eviction confirmation call arrived, crisp and professional. "Both properties are now vacant and ready for re-rental. What are your instructions?" I set the phone down and moved to my desk, where my stock portfolios glowed on the computer screen. The numbers weren't just money anymore. They were freedom, opportunity, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of what had been. The eviction agent's voice still ringing in my ears, I turned back to the screen, ready to reshape the remnants of my old life into something unbound. After pocketing the phone, I settled into my chair, the finality of my children's pleas still echoing faintly in my mind. I opened my investment app and began a careful process of liquidation. Not everything. I'd learned too well the power of compound interest to abandon it entirely, but enough to fund the next chapter. "Mr. Simmons?" My broker's voice came over the line, warm but professional. "What can I do for you today? I want to sell 30% of my portfolio, blue chip stocks, diversified across sectors. I need the funds liquid within a week." "That's a substantial amount," he said. "May I ask your plan?" "A new life," I said simply. "Sold." The transfers moved with seamless efficiency. Millions flowed into my accounts, steady and precise, like water finding its level. I listed both rental properties with new management companies, screening tenants who would actually value what they were getting. The monthly rental income would provide stability without the emotional baggage of my children's occupancy. My own house required minimal staging. I had kept it functional and tidy for years, and it showed beautifully. Within a week, I had an offer, a young family who saw potential rather than pretension. That evening, I browsed oceanfront properties online, the glow of the screen illuminating possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. California called, promising distance, renewal, a break from everything that had defined my past. When I boarded the plane, my luggage was light, my heart lighter. The mountains shrank behind me as the coastline grew closer. Carmel greeted me with salty air and endless horizons, a stark contrast to Montana's narrow valleys. The house I bought perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, its windows framing sunsets in colors I hadn't remembered existed. Veronica, my real estate agent, silver-haired and kind-eyed, guided me through the closing with practiced ease. "You picked a wonderful spot," she said, handing me the keys. The community here is very welcoming. She was right. At one of the evening lectures at the local community center, I met Catherine, a widow who had moved to Carmel after her husband passed away 3 years earlier. We started talking about books, which led to conversations about walks along the beach, and eventually to dinners overlooking the water. I raised 3 children, she told me one evening as we stood on my deck, watching waves crash against the shore below. They visit twice a year. Beautiful, but distant. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. What is it about then? I asked. Respect, kindness, and the choice to see value in someone beyond what they can give you, she replied. Standing beside her, I couldn't help but marvel at how the vastness of the ocean reflected the wide-open possibilities I'd discovered by finally standing firm against the people who had once diminished me. The lessons I'd learned from building my investments after the divorce, patience, persistence, and the power of compound growth, had proved relevant in life, not just in money. We walked the beach most evenings, our conversations flowing as naturally as the tide. Catherine had been a teacher and understood the satisfaction of nurturing something meaningful. I found myself opening up about my journey as an investor, the long years of careful planning and accumulation that had brought me to this moment of freedom. You know, Catherine said one evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, I think you've been investing in yourself all along. The money was just the vehicle. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably one of my children trying a new approach. I glanced at it, then deleted it without opening, turning my attention back to the horizon where tomorrow's possibilities waited. The waves continued their endless rhythm, and I realized I had finally found what I had been investing in all these years. Not just financial security, but self-respect, the ability to walk away from toxicity, and the wisdom to recognize genuine connection when it appeared. As the sun slipped below the Pacific, painting the sky in golds and crimsons, I felt a contentment I hadn't known was possible. The future stretched out ahead, free from the expectations of ungrateful children and the shadows of past disappointments. I was free. If you've enjoyed this story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the right.